Let's crack open a beer and share some thoughts.
Welcome to Opinions, and we are diving straight into the beers this week because you and I, mate, are on the continent drinking Belgians, aren't we?
We are. We've gone full on Belgian-y today. I think they're quite accessible Belgian-y beers, though, if I recall correctly, though.
They are. They're ones kind of at the easier to get hold of end of the scale. But we are not alone. We are joined by another guest drinker this week. So welcome to Opinions, the Beer Wrangler Jonny Tyson.
Hi guys, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Yourself?
Pretty good, thanks. All better now I've got a beer in front of me.
Excellent. So what have you got in front of you, mate, before we get onto our beers? What are you enjoying for?
Well, I'm enjoying... I've sort of saved this particularly because I've heard you mention it so many times from my mix pack, which is the Thornbridge Firestone Walker Pondera.
Great beer.
Great beer.
So I got a sort of mix pack of Thornbridge, and I just thought I'm not going to have that one in the afternoon. I thought I'll save that and have it while we're having a chat, because I know you guys are sort of fans of that one particularly. But I had a load of other good Thornbridge beers in the pack, so.
Look forward to hearing what you think of that as we go through the show.
And Martin, what have you got in your glass? What's your first beer this evening?
I've gone for what I think is probably one of my first Belgian beer experiences, a bottle of Leffe Blond.
In a similar sort of vein, I've gone for a blonde as well. I've got Chouffe, which is an 8% Belgian blonde beer. So starting nice and easy tonight. So should we dive in, because I'm quite thirsty. So cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Okay, let's get some thoughts on what we've got. Jonny, is the Pondera everything that you hoped it would be?
I think it is. I think a bit like yourselves. I think I love West Coast IPA. I love sort of classic American IPAs, whether they be West Coast or otherwise. Just because that's the sort of era that I got into craft beer. And I've sort of missed having them as one of my sort of regulars, and I think this feels like an absolutely sort of classic, a bit more tropical than perhaps it would have been back in the day, but really, really good, really well balanced, a nice good level of bitterness, which I do appreciate in an IPA. I think that sort of thing I miss sometimes with the New England hazy styles. Is not quite bitter enough for me, but it's good, very good so far.
Excellent. I think that's something that a lot of people have commented on recently, isn't it? That the availability of West Coast IPAs and also the fact that people are now beginning to miss that bitterness. We're almost not. I don't think by a long shot we're over the juice craze. I think that's very much here to stay. But I think it's great to see that there's more balance coming back in terms of the availability of. You can either go East Coast or West Coast now.
Yeah, I think so. As much as I do quite like the sort of juicy IPAs, but I'm not crazy about them. I do get a bit tired. I like one every now and then, and it's really nice, but it's not something I can drink an awful lot of. I'm sure other people are totally different, because it is quite juicy and not very bitter and quite easy going. But I do sort of feel it lacks a sort of beery quality about it. When I have a beer, I want to sort of feel like I'm drinking a beer rather than something that feels like a sort of guava juice or something that happens to be alcoholic. That's slightly kind of mean to some of them, because some of them are really well made. But I do like to sort of feel I'm having a proper beer over the course of the evening or whatever. And a West Coast IPA really does do that.
Yeah, I think the Pondera, I think you're right. It's probably that little bit juicier than perhaps it would have been when we first, let's say 10 years ago, when we were all starting to discover some of those beers from the other side of the pond. But I think it's definitely up there in my top 3 West Coast style beers this year, I would say.
Yeah, I think that sort of slight tropical note gives a sort of a nod to the more modern hops, but still the profile and the balance is that sort of classic West Coast style. And for that reason, I think it works brilliantly well for this day and age, because it gives you pretty much the best of both worlds.
Yeah, agreed. Steve, how are you finding your Chouffe?
It's Belgian-y. For sure. I'm getting in early with that one. It's kind of got that sweet honey sweetness initially. Loads of carbonation in there, so it's really quite refreshing. But then it's got kind of a bit of a spicy sort of warming finish to it. And that really gives it a different dimension as you get to the end of it. it really, I think one thing that it does, it really heightens the alcohol at that point as well. So you take your first sip and you're like, oh, this is nice, this is really refreshing. And then you get to that big warming hit at the finish and you're like, whoa, yeah, I know what I'm drinking here. But no, it's I think this is possibly the first time I've had this.
Oh, really?
Wow. Yeah, and I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, I think I've got a 750 bottle in the in the beer cupboard, just waiting for the right moment to crack it open. I'm a big fan of Le Chouffe, I have to admit. But I get what you're saying. It does hide its ABV to start off with, but the more you get into it, the more you think, okay, there's something going on here.
Does have a nice peppery finish. I find it's like it's from the yeast fermentation, a little bit of like pepper note on the finish, which I absolutely love, and I love that beer with food. I think it's a great beer to have with something sort of quite hearty, sort of sausagey, pork, those kind of things. It works incredibly well. It was one of the first sort of Belgian beers I had after Leffe. To be honest, it was one of the ones we sold in a shop I used to work in years and years ago. And absolutely it blew my mind at how easy it was to drink at that alcohol level. This was sort of towards the end of the 90s. So I was sort of not drinking very strong beers at that time. And I thought Le Chouffe, I think it just hides its alcohol, beautiful profile, and lovely sort of peppery, warming finish.
Absolutely. I completely agree with what you're saying on all of that. And that also gives us a lovely segue into asking Martin about his beer as well. How's the Leffe doing, mate?
It's been a while since I've had it, to be honest. And it was probably one of my, to coin a phrase we've used in the past, a bit of a gateway Belgian beer for me. I think because of its accessibility. It still drinks quite smooth for a 6.5% beer. I reckon Belgian beers were definitely also my gateway to higher strength beers. There's definitely a little bit of honey sweetness on this beer as well, but it's a very smooth. I don't think you get any of that. There's none of that peppery finish you referred to in your beer, Steve, at the back end of it. It is just very smooth, a little bit sweet, and it is one you can just drink cold, drink chilled, but it would creep up on you at 6.5%.
Yeah, I think it's one of those that you know, just occasionally you do find yourself coming back to time and time again, isn't it? I think, as you say, it's a perfect example of a gateway beer to a style.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, while we're enjoying these first beers, let's have a bit of a chat to you, Jonny. Welcome back to Hopinions. Our older listeners maybe will remember that you were on a very, very early episode of Hopinions. In fact, you were on 2 episodes. You were on the 2-part show that we did about Goose Island, drinking some of the amazing beers that yourself and Josh shared with us on that occasion. But for those people that maybe haven't come across you before or your work, do you want to give us a little bit of a potted history in terms of the Beer Wrangler and how you've got to where you are now?
Yeah, well, I sort of started life when I finished university. I got a job, kind of a sort of in-between a job in an Oddbins, when Oddbins was sort of throughout the country. There were 200 or 300 shops in the sort of late 90s. And Oddbins is one of the few places that sold a good range of Belgian beers, including La Chouffe in the sort of 97, I think, probably 96, 97, I think I worked there. I assistant managed the store that's actually near me now in Fulham Broadway. And I really sort of got to grips with interesting Belgian beers, and I really sort of got excited by them. But we also sold some early, what we were calling then, American microbrews. So before the term craft beer was more widespread, and we sold sort of things like Pete's Wicked Ale, and these sort of brand new generation of American beers. Because growing up, American beer was Budweiser, it was Coors or Miller, things like that. And for us, sort of not massively interesting. I was sort of brought up with Cask Ale. My dad was a Cask Ale fan. And getting these Belgian beers and then getting these new American beers over from the States, really to show what small brewers could do, was really exciting. And I think that was the germ of my interest in the beer world, other than just the general interest in beer that, you know, young guys will have. I then sort of had a sort of different career for a while in television, but then I moved to Canada in 2007, and I ended up sort of back working, running shops and working in pubs and things like that. I'd worked in pubs in the UK. I was clearing up glasses and cleaning from the age of 16 onwards, so I kind of lived and breathed pubs. But here the craft beer revolution was in full kind of swing. Lots of amazing local Canadian beers, lots of amazing American beers, and running shops, beer and wine shops, where we had, you know, over 1,000 different beers in walk-in coolers. and very quickly ended up becoming the buyer for both beer and wine, and doing lots and lots of education on beer and wine, and sort of going through that journey of trying to learn more and find out more about all these amazing different beers and different styles, often old styles that American brewers were kind of reinventing and restarting, like porter and brown ales, and stuff that perhaps I hadn't drunk in the UK, because there hadn't, apart from Newcastle brown ale, wasn't a huge amount of other beers other than bitter and lager readily available. So that really got me going, and the enthusiasm and the passion that the locals had in Vancouver on the West Coast. You know, BC is a traditional hop growing region, not so much now, but it certainly had that history. And you start seeing a lot of those West Coast IPAs very, very popular there. And sort of moved on from there, and working in pubs, ran a craft beer bar and restaurant, was a buyer for a few stores which had 1,000+ beers, and it was a fantastic time. I had a huge amount of fun and learnt a massive amount about beer. And that was really the start. And I started training people, basically, because I love learning, and started on my sort of Cicerone journey, doing my certified beer server, which is the sort of level 1 of the Cicerone program, and then sort of starting to learn about becoming a certified Cicerone, which I took the exam just before I left Vancouver, and I failed the tasting portion by 1 point. So I had to retake it when I moved back to the UK in 2013 or something, and then carried on there. And I've always been sort of keen to teach people. So I ended up with work, was part of my work was informing and teaching people. So that's that sort of the teaching journey sort of started. But you guys sort of met me when I'd sort of moved on. I'd done my certified Cicerone and beer sommelier, and I'm a wine tutor as well. So I'm a WSET wine educator, instructor as well. So, and you guys met me. I'd been hired by Goose Island essentially, with other brands as well, to be their head of education, develop beer education plans for Europe. And it was a huge change in my life. I'd only ever worked for small pubs and small companies, and then working for a company owned by AB InBev as one of the largest, the largest brewer in the world, was a pretty sort of tumultuous step to make from someone who's always worked for small independent companies. But it was just such an amazing opportunity. I could not turn it down, because I thought, if I hate it and I don't like it, then I'll leave. It's quite simple, but I can go along, see what it's all about. And, as far as I knew at the time, there was no such job as a full-time beer educator paid for by a brewery. You are a full-time beer educator. That is the only thing you need to worry about doing. So that, I just thought, that's got to be worth a try. And as you guys know, I think a lot of people who don't like the big brewers, forget, as you get a little bit older with children and things like that, and you have, to turn down a sort of a reasonably well-paid job doing something you love is a pretty tough thing to do. Probably a lot easier when you're 23 and you don't have quite so many things to worry about.
You've recently started doing a podcast as well.
I have.
The A to Z.
A to Z.
You've got stuck on a letter recently.
Not luck in the letter. Yeah, it's probably bad education. Don't know my alphabet. It was a bit of a sort of a thing I've been meaning to do. I run a beer and wine school. It's my company I share with somebody else, and South London Wine School, and it's sort of franchise that we do. I do all the sort of beer education as well, and it's been sort of very problematic. So I basically thought, well, I've been meaning to start a podcast, so I'm going to do that. And about 3 or 4 weeks ago, things just have been getting very difficult with work and lots of sort of, lockdown related stresses that I'm sure lots of self-employed and sort of one-man band businesses are suffering. And I've had to sort of step away from it temporarily. I did step away on a letter, which I found difficult to write. Because I'm the only person on it, I write it as a script pretty much, because I started by not doing that. And the first things that I tried to record weren't very good. So I thought, I'll ditch those and I'm going to write it as a script. And things that I feel I need to do more research and a little bit more, that I haven't really had time to write the full script for a 20-minute, half an hour podcast. Some things I just know and I can just write and I'll get it done. But E is for extreme beers, and it requires, and I have done a lot of research on different extreme beers and what people think about different extreme beers, and I just wasn't really happy with it. So I have paused a bit on it, but I will get back to it. I've just had a lot of work to do trying to sort of rescue a semblance of a business in the last month, which has been quite difficult. So it's been very challenging, as I'm sure lots of people out there are finding as well.
Oh,
But
like
I
you
will
say, I'm
continue.
sure you're not the only person to, as a self-employed one-man band or even two-man band, two-person band, has been suffering. But what I will say is the first 4 episodes, A to D, thoroughly enjoyed them, Johnny, especially as it is just effectively a monologue. It's still a very enjoyable monologue. And unlike a lot of what Steve and I do, you actually throw in quite a lot of facts as well. So, it's always good to learn.
Well, I love education. I am a beer and wine teacher, so I like, I thought I'm going to do that element. I didn't want to just do a version of things that you guys are doing and your experiences and opinions on things, because you guys do it very well, and there's other people that do it very well. I want to do something that I can do, which is maybe a little bit different. So a little bit of education, and because it's a monologue, it's got to be short. I don't think I could go for an hour, and still keep people listening with interest. So I thought I'm pitching it at sort of that 20 minutes to half an hour sort of mark, where people could listen to it in pretty, in a short time, where they have to travel from A to B, go for a walk, go for a run. Some people listen to podcast running, things like that. So I thought that would be sort of a better time for me to be able to sort of fill in and do something a little bit more educational, but not too deep. And that's the thing that I have to stop with. I have to sort of stop myself being too kind of academic about beer. I don't want to drive everyone away and ruin the fun of what essentially is a really fun thing to drink and talk about and think about.
Well, so far, like I said, the first 4 episodes, I think you've struck a really good balance between facts and fun. So well done. Look forward to when E and F come out.
Thank you.
Hope you carry on all the way through the series.
I'm very much looking forward to hearing the next shows as well. And what we'll do is we'll put a link in the show notes to the podcast. So any of our listeners that haven't yet got round to giving it a listen, we'd suggest they give that a go. And like I say, it is very educational, and it is I've got a very short attention span, and it kind of keeps my attention for the amount of time that the shows that you've done so far run. So I think if somebody wants to learn quickly, it's a great way to do it. Moving on to this week's news, and there's really only one thing to talk about, and that is the fact that as of the day of recording today, which is Sunday, the pubs opened up again yesterday. And I'm sure we've all got our thoughts on this in particular. I've got to say, from what I saw in my Twitter feed, it's not what I expected to see. Actually, what I seemed to see was a lot of very responsible setups, people giving a lot of praise for what they was experiencing, and maybe with the exception of some of the scenes that we saw last night in Soho, generally people abiding by the guidelines that have been set out.
That's fairly much what I've seen as well. So we're 24 to 36 hours since pubs opened as time of recording. Everything I've seen so far has been very much more of the positive nature. Like I said, I think if we take Soho out of the pictures from Soho very late on Saturday night, early Sunday morning, out of the equation, and I think there were some similar pictures in and around Dublin. Let's take those out of the equation. If we're talking about a lot of average pubs, bottle shops, tap rooms, all of what I saw was a very positive experience, both from a staff point of view and a customer point of view. I think one of the few things I did see that was a bit annoying was someone tweeting about bookings being made and people not turning up, which I think we may have touched upon last week, Steve.
Yeah, we did.
But basically, that's a group who've made multiple bookings, and then they've gone for the one which is the most popular and gone to that place and not bothered to cancel the other ones.
I was going to say, as someone who's run bars and restaurants, it's the number one. It's the number one issue. You want to have people in. You want to have people that might not turn up on time. They tell you, but people just booking 3 things and choosing at the last minute shows such an utter disrespect for these businesses, which are struggling like anything at the moment. And if you make a booking, you can't make it. It's a simple phone call, just so they can free that table, especially at the moment where you've got to have tables and bookings and things like that are more important. It's a slightly different world. We have to be a bit more respectful of pubs. We have to treat a pub a bit more like a restaurant, essentially, if you're booking tables. And if you can't make it, let them know, and then someone else can get that table. It's so simple.
I completely agree. And to be honest, I've always, even with restaurants in days gone by, especially now, most of them you can actually, there's a cancel button. But that was really the only main negative I saw, to be honest. What was your experience in London, Johnny, that you saw or heard?
Well, in slightly sort of the sleepier end of southwest London where I am, I'm in Southfield, so it's quite near Wandsworth and Wimbledon, around that kind of area. I've got 2 kids, so I wasn't going to go out in the evening and sort of go and get hammered or anything. So we went for a walk in the afternoon. I passed a few pubs. I wanted to sort of check out some of the pubs that I go to, what they were like. They were all, as used. One was closed. Actually, one of my regular places was closed anyway. Decided not to open yesterday. One was very quiet. They've got a big beer garden. They've got a big spacious pub, and it's one which it's not really on a thoroughfare where people would just sort of drop in. You have to sort of want to go there. But I thought that'd be an ideal pub to go to because it's really big, high ceilings, big, spacious, nice, big, spacious beer garden. And that was pretty much, I walked past there at about sort of 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and it was completely empty. And I was amazed. There's about 3 people in it. And then I went to, and then we stopped at a place called Merton Abbey Mills, which is it's got like a little market, and it's got 2 pubs which have outdoor space, and they've got indoors as well. So I thought we'd check both of those out and have a look. We all drank outdoors, just because I got the 2 kids and everything. It makes life a little bit easier under certain circumstances. But I went into the pubs, had a chat with the staff, and everything looked very, very good and very kind of respectful. People were standing apart, and they weren't at the bar. They were at tables, and I asked the staff how it was going. They said, yeah, absolutely no problem at all. I didn't see anybody causing any problems. I saw everybody being really sensible, enjoying a nice few beers, which is exactly what you want. That's what a pub's really about.
I'd agree with that. And but Steve, you took our research to a different level, didn't you? You popped in today.
I did. So despite my many public statements that I won't be going anywhere near a pub until September, I found myself in one this afternoon.
On the 5th of July?
24 hours. Yeah. And the thing is, it's quite interesting because I think one of the things that came up when we were discussing this last week were people saying that having to pre-book and these new restrictions and everything is going to somewhat take away the spontaneity of going into the pub. Now, we didn't plan to go to the pub today. We were just walking into town to pick up a few bits. We happened to walk past one of the pubs. Just
to be clear, when Steve's talking about he's talking about him and his partner Emma, rather than Steve and myself.
Yes,
okay.
yeah, sorry.
Sometimes we do stuff separately, just for the benefit of listeners out there.
Yes, it's not always the royal we. But yeah, so went past one of the pubs that has reopened in town. I mean, my town of Whittam's got there are probably about 7 pubs in the town centre, and I'd say only about half of those are open. The White Hart being one of them, which is one of the oldest pubs in town. It does serve a decent range of cask beer in there as well, even though it is under Green King ownership. So we walked past it. It looked fairly empty, and we said, let's give it a go. Now, I'd say my first impressions were the initial experience of going in was a little bit confusing because the sign on the door said, please call this telephone number if you haven't booked to see if we've got space available. But a quick conversation from the doorway to the bar ascertained that there was space available, and we just had to walk around to what they've got, like a reception area in the pub. So we walked around, but then we had to walk through the bar, past the tables where people were sat and past the actual bar itself. So we walked around. We were greeted at a station. We were asked for basic details. So name, telephone number, that was all we were asked for. And then we were asked if we had pre-booked or not. And when we said no, and said, do you have a table available? She was like, yes. And then interestingly, she said, how long would you like to stay for? Which is obviously something that you're not used to being asked in a pub. So we said, we're just going to stay for a couple. So she said, well, I'll put you down until 2 o'clock. So we were then shown to our table, which was outside because it's been a lovely day today. And we wanted to sit outside in the sun anyway. We were told that there would be a server come to the table. No menus on the table. Servers had all the details. You just had to speak to them about it. That's what happened. We then had a server. They'd come, they'd ask us for our order, they'd go away, they'd bring the drinks back, we'd pay contactless. Interestingly, and this is one of the points that Emma made while we was in there, was that we were served by... we ended up having 3 pints, and we extended our stay by an hour as well, which we were allowed to do. But on each occasion, a different server brought our drinks to the table. So we had one server take our order, and then we had 3 different servers bring drinks to the table. And each of those servers did it in a different way. So one of them brought the tray to the table, put the tray on the table and said, "Can you take your drinks off so I can take the tray away so I don't have to touch your drinks?" The other 2 put the tray on the table, pick the drinks up and put them on the table. And the point that Em made was, the ones that picked the drinks up, that's probably the 3rd person to have touched that glass since it's come out of the dishwasher. So you've had the person that's emptied the dishwasher, you've had the person that's poured the pint, and then you've had the server. So you've actually got those 3 points of contact before that pint actually gets into your hands, which was the only kind of questionable thing. But, I think, and a lot of people have said this, we've got to be patient at the moment, because this is quite possibly some of those people working today, it might be their first shift back in 3 months.
It might be their first shift ever.
Yeah. So
for some people,
they're learning a new system. There was a process of, when it was time to leave, we were asked to take our glasses to a collection point and to inform the pub that we were leaving, so that they could come to our table, they could clear the table, and they could tick off that we had left. So they had that space open again. Now, the thing that wound me up with that was that in the time that we were there, I'd say about 100% of people who left their tables just got up, left their glasses and walked out. Somebody did go back in to say they were leaving, but they still left their glasses on the table, even though they were walking past the glass collection point on their way out, because it was a one-way system. And I looked at it and I was like, you're just creating them more work now, because now you've got to have a server come and take those glasses away, and that person's then got to come back to the table to clean it. They've got to come back and do their job a second time, and you're going past the collection point. Take the glasses with you.
They're going to be the same people who leave their stuff at McDonald's as well, aren't they?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And although McDonald's have all fast food places have created that as an efficiency and cost saving point, the pub you're at haven't. But how was the actual experience? So you've detailed the logistics. How was the experience, Steve?
You know what? I'd say, with the exception of the table service, it was probably no different from if I had sat there in that beer garden last summer, enjoying a couple of pints on a sunny Sunday afternoon. Interestingly, one of the things that we did see happen as well, and again, I think this is just people getting used to a new way of doing things, is that there was a group that was sat quite close to us, who they were on a table. And when the sun moved and that table then went into the shade, the 6 of them got up and moved to the next table that was in the sun. And so then one of them had to go in and say, "Oh, we've moved." And then a member of staff came out and cleaned the table. And I just think, people need to have a little bit more awareness of the tiniest of their actions is actually going to be creating quite a lot of work for the venues at the moment. And maybe just to be a little bit more mindful of things like that. But again, it's day 2 as we recalled, and people are still getting used to this. We briefly spoke to the staff at the pub, and they were saying that yesterday when they opened, they had 6 visits from the police throughout the day, just literally making sure that people were following the guidelines. And Whittam's a small town, and if only half of the 7 pubs are open, that's probably quite easy for the police to manage. I'm not sure how easy that would be in larger cities, or whether that's been replicated up and down the country, that the police have actually, were they quite present yesterday in terms of going into pubs and essentially saying, "Are you following the guidelines?" and being very visual about it.
Speaking to one of my brothers earlier, the one who doesn't live in Germany. So I haven't got a German update. Apologies, listeners. But Brian lives in Milton Keynes, and him and his girlfriend booked a 4-hour slot at one of the craftier venues in Milton Keynes. And his experience, this was a Saturday evening, 6 till 10. And he said, you go in, on the way in, there's someone at the door explaining the protocol. Then it is very much arrows directing you around. They told you the table you're going to. Then you can use an app to get your drinks delivered to your table. A bit more of a limited menu than what they've experienced in the past. But one thing he did mention was that there was a couple of groups who had obviously booked separately, but had ended up quite close together in table size and table wise. And the manager did come over and said to them, look, if you want to talk to each other, that's fine, but you can't move closer to each other. You can't direct your conversations towards each other. And if you do, I will have to ask you to leave. Again, credit where credit's due, that the manager did that. And yes, I have to admit, when I go back, actually, I think some of the things that I've heard and seen put in place over the last 36 hours, I'm actually thinking, do you know what? I'm actually quite looking forward to some of this. Not necessarily PPE and yellow and black markers around the place and sticky tape, that kind of stuff, but the respectful nature of customers and staff alike, table service, apps to order your drinks. I can definitely see some of those things sticking, I have to admit, even when, if and when restrictions ends completely and or a vaccine being discovered. I have to admit, I would say on the whole, it's been positive so far. The walk around I did locally, having a look in from the outside, places were open, people on the door, distances seem to be fairly decent. Tables have been obviously moved around, outside tables as well. So yeah, I'm what I've seen so far makes me think that I hadn't, unlike Steve, suggested when I might go back. I was go back when I'm comfortable. But the initial experiences of people that I know and trust seems quite positive so far.
Don't get me wrong. I think had we walked past today and it been a bit busier, or had there been a queue, I don't think we would have bothered. I think it was opportunistic that there was space. It was quite empty, and we were able to walk in and have quite a positive experience. It was a good experience, and it's one that has made me reconsider whether I'll hang on to go back to some of my favourite places. I think on every occasion, it's very much going to be, what is it like? And that will be what helps me make my decision. Is it too busy? Does the system seem easy? That sort of thing. It will be a very much on the spur of the moment type decision.
Excellent. It seems fairly positive so far. Early days, but anyone else who's got any experiences, let us know. We're always interested to hear.
So while we've been chatting about those experiences, I imagine everybody's drained their glass at the same time. So
long time ago.
let's get a round of final thoughts on our initial beers. Jonny, any different views on the Pondera?
Yeah, only that it's got better. I think this is one of the best beers I've had in a while. Actually, I think it's really, really good. I just think the hop flavour is perfectly in balance with the body and the bitterness. It's exactly what I expect. It's what I want rather than what I expect. It's 6.7%, which is not for me an easy alcohol level to make an easy drinking beer. I think some people do it, some people do it badly. And I think this has been done extremely well. I think it's very easy drinking. I knocked that back. I was looking at it, trying to not drink it. I was like, thinking, do I have to should I keep a little bit left for the final thoughts? And I thought, no, sod it, I'm knocking it back. And I could have done with 2 of those cans. And those are the sort of the tall boy, sort of full 40s. Quite easy to drink. So lots of flavour, really good balance, good bitterness, and very drinkable at that percentage. So gets good grades from me.
Excellent. Martin, how was the Leffe, mate?
To be honest, I could have probably done a couple of those, the same as Jonny was talking about the Pondera there. I'd forgotten quite how drinkable Leffe was, to be honest. Although it has got that sweetness, especially initially, and you get maybe a bit of banana chew aroma as you go through it. It's very consistent all the way through. Even when it starts to warm up a bit, it doesn't get cloying, doesn't get any more sweeter. It is very, very easy to drink, and I can see why people can pick up a 4-pack and will do a 4-pack without really thinking about it. I could easily have done 2 in our first segment of the show, Steve.
The Chouffe was didn't really change from my initial thoughts on it. It had that Belgian sweet quality right at the beginning, all the way through to that spicy, peppery, warmy, boozy finish. Just an absolute delight to drink, and probably much like you guys, I could have done a second one. Whether I'd be able to actually present the second half of the show if I'd knocked back a second 8% beer is questionable, but we'll see, won't we? Because I've just put my next beer in the glass and I'm stepping up to 9% this time. So
hey!
I'm moving on, continuing on our Belgian theme. I am moving on to Chimay Blue. So this is their Grand Reserve for this year, 2020. And that's about all I know about it. There's not a lot of information on the label. It's listed on Untapped as a Belgian strong dark ale. So we'll see what I think of that in a second. Martin, what have you got for your second beer tonight?
I've got the Trappist Rochefort 8, which is 9.2%. What else would you do on a Sunday evening, to be honest? Very much looking forward to this. I am a big fan of these range of beers anyway.
And Johnny, what have you got for your second beer this evening?
Well, I wanted to sort of, I wanted to have something which I've had before, but I love, and it's a very interesting beer. It's a good one for teaching people about beer, because it's a collaboration between my local brewery and my old employer. So it's Obadiah Poundage, sort of Victorian porter from Wimbledon and Goose Island. Collaboration between those two breweries, Derek Prentice at Wimbledon and Mike Siegel, who's the innovation brewer at Goose Island, 2 people I know. And this is a collaboration with Ron Pattinson, who I'm sure you guys are familiar with, the beer historian, beer writer, to recreate a genuinely, as far as we can tell, what would an English or London porter taste like from sort of Victorian era London, and going with a sort of genuine English porter recipe, having some aged, some fresh, and blending it. And they had some special malts developed to make this. So they use a brown malt, which you can't sort of get anymore. So they engaged a maltster to make a sort of what's called a diastatic brown malt, which is a brown malt that has significant fermentables in it. Brown malt today is a roasted malt, and it doesn't have any sort of significant fermentables in it. So it's made with pale malt, a copy of some old brown malt, and black patent malt. And they aged a third of it in sort of oak vats or foeders in Chicago, and blended that with the fresh beer as a sort of combination.
I can't wait to hear what you say about that, because I've got one in the cupboard.
Great.
So I was going to say exactly the same thing. I'm really looking forward to Johnny's thoughts, because I've got one in the cupboard as well, which I'm just waiting to drink.
Yeah, and I haven't thought, I have one of those things, when's the good time to drink it? So if we get some very positive feedback from you in the next few minutes, then it could be coming towards the front of the cellar. Shall we get into our beers then?
Yeah, let's dive in. Cheers.
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 So what do you think of the Chimay, Steve?
It's really tasty, actually. It's less Belgian-y at the moment. There's some sort of dark chocolate notes going on in there. Again, quite a warming, boozy finish to it, which you'd probably expect for the 9% that it sits at. Maybe a slightest hint of spice on the finish, but other than that, just really, really smooth, really, really easy to drink.
So it's quite. Whenever I have Chimay Blue, I always think it's lighter bodied than it should be. That 9%. It's that classic Belgian way of making beers that are what they call sort of digestible, which have that light body and easy drinking despite its ridiculously strong alcohol. And Chimay is a great example of that. I drink that and you think there's absolutely no way that is 9%, just because it's got that sort of ease going down.
Oh, I would definitely agree with that. And I think the Trappist Rochefort I'm drinking, the number 8, isn't a great deal different to the Chimay. Again, it's quite light of body. It's got a bit of a sweet maltiness to it at the start. It hasn't really got any sort of like peppery finish you described the Chimay, but it's got it's got a warming finish, but it's got a finish which still makes you want to come back for more, and deliciously drinkable for 9.2%.
What does the Obadiah poundage taste like then? Let Martin and I know whether we should be drinking this soon.
Yeah, I think it's drinking sort of perfectly well now. I think it does have a fantastic balance on the aromas. It does have a sort of a slight, almost like sort of cocoa powder and almost like caramel without the sweetness, the sort of smell of caramel without the sugar. If people can sort of separate the aroma from the taste, it does. There's a sort of hint of herbaceousness and sort of slight earthiness to it as well. There is a little bit of acidity to it. It's a touch of that, but it's rounded out with the fresh beer in there as well. So it's got all those sort of combinations. It's got a hint of dried fruit as well. And it is ridiculously drinkable. It's 6.3%.
While we're enjoying these beers, then let's dive into this week's question.
Opinions, 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 opinions.
Not so much of a poll this week, but this was a question that I randomly asked at the beginning of June on Twitter that ended up getting a whole load.
Very random, Steve. Very random.
Ended up just getting a whole load of responses, and I thought, well, actually, we could use this as content for the show. So the question I asked was, for folks who practice regular abstinence from beer as part of your drinking patterns, do you consider alcohol-free beers to be okay to drink during dry periods, or is that still beer in your mind? And I think at the stage when I asked that, I was in the middle of having a dry week myself, and it was a really warm day, and I was like, I wanted that cold, crisp, refreshing hit that sometimes you can only really get from beer. And I had some alcohol-free beers in the fridge, and I ended up not drinking one because I did feel as though it was kind of cheating on myself, because I was on a dry week, which in my mind means it's no beer, it's no alcohol. So therefore, even a low alcohol or a no alcohol beer to me was still a beer. So that was the question, and I guess that's my thoughts. I've gone in early with what I think of it there. So actually, we might as well get all of our thoughts then before we take some of the feedback that we got. Martin, I suspect that you're going to have a slightly different view to this one to me, because I know how you kind of use your alcohol-free beers as well.
Yeah, I don't think of it as a breaking my dry spell, for example. So especially the last few weeks at work, it's been quite hectic. So my Monday to Thursday, for example, has been fairly much dry, but sometimes, like you said, Steve, sometimes the first quenching aspect of especially a can of beer, that carbonation, that cold fizz, that crispness, can only be achieved by having a beer, but can still be achieved by having a 0.5% or less beer, in my mind. And so I've got a variety of those. I've got Budvar Free, Nanny State, Go Ship 0.5, and I've got Wild Wave, the cider from Adnams at 0.5 as well. And I have to admit, the Wild Wave 0.5 is excellent. It's very hard to distinguish that one from the Wild Wave 5%. And I will have a couple, maybe one or two, and sometimes it comes after a bike ride or a run, and it just goes down so well. But I still feel, okay, I haven't really had a beer. So I definitely see it as not breaking a dry spell.
Jonny, your views on this one?
Yeah, I'm sort of very much the same mind. I don't see it as cheating. I see it as something that is helping me through a period that I'm choosing to have as a dry period. I do spend a month a year not drinking. It may be a shock to people that a lifetime spent working in restaurants and bars and the drinks trade, that my liver could be in a better situation than it currently finds itself. Not terrible, but it's just, my doctor said, you've drunk a lot in your life, and it adds up. But if you spend a month a year not drinking, your liver gets time to draw breath and recover. And it means you can probably drink for the rest of your life. And that's the kind of motivation that I needed. And so for the last 6 years, 7 years now, I have at least a month off a year. And if I didn't have alcohol-free beer, I could not do it. I don't think I could physically do it. I'm not that strong-willed. And I think alcohol-free beer is a million times better than it was millions, whenever it was 20, 30 years ago, whenever Caliber was launched. You guys are sort of similar age to me, sort of, when Caliber was launched as the big alcohol-free beer, it's sort of all those kind of mainstream lager, alcohol-free lagers just tasted like water. But now we've got fantastic options. And I think if you do like beer, but you can't or don't want to drink alcohol for whatever reason, and no one's going to be sort of casting aspersions if you choose not to have an alcohol-free week or an alcohol-free month. But if you do have to, or you do want to, there are so many amazing options out there. I think there's really well-made beers. People are getting their malts, their sort of grists right with different malts to maintain body and flavor, so it's not too thin and watery. And obviously with the hopping levels and stuff for different styles, I think it offers a huge amount of flavor. I'm really impressed, particularly Big Drop Citra Pale Ale, I think, has been one of my favorites recently. And I think I'm also still supporting breweries, particularly if it's a sort of smaller independent brewery like Big Drop that's, and they're doing a really good job, or Infinite Sessions, people like that, they're doing a good job at making alcohol-free beers.
Well, it seems like I'm in the minority here on this week's show. Let's see what some of the comments that we had back and see what people thought on this one. So first of all, from Graham Hughes, alcohol-free beer is something I've never given much thought to. I still remember Caliber, and I'm aware that there is much more choice and better standards these days. But when I do dry January, it's not just about health, but also to check I'm not becoming dependent on that weekend beer. From Simon Clark at Simon Carbon, as good as alcohol-free beers are now, if I'm not drinking beer, I drink tea when I'm at home because it's almost 0 calories and much cheaper than alcohol-free beer.
From Just Beer Barry at Just Beer Barry, I'm a big advocate of alcohol-free beers. There are some decent offerings now in comparison to years gone by, ideal for school nights and periods of abstinence. Dean Taylor, I never tried alcohol-free beers on my previous holidays from booze, then found I was back into heavy drinking after a while. Rather than seeing alcohol-free as cheating during abstinence, it might be good practice for new habits that help you drink more responsibly after abstinence is over.
From Neil Hayden at Neil Hayden 73, when I'm not on the beer, I won't even have an alcohol-free beer. So from Sunday to Thursday, it would be water, tea, milk or pop. From Josh Howes at Joshua A. Howes, I would generally steer clear because my non-drinking days are for general health benefits rather than alcohol consumption specifically. And I don't think alcohol-free beers tend to be particularly healthy. I have enjoyed them occasionally though.
So from Mark Johnson at Mark N. Johnson, I don't know why I say at Mark N. Johnson. Everyone knows where Mark Johnson is anyway. Why do I bother doing that? I don't see a problem if you enjoy them. Personally, I don't enjoy them enough to be able to justify the price of many over, say, any other alcohol-free beverage I enjoy. But they helped me cut back in January. From Katie at Doc Maniday, alcohol-free beer counts as not booze. I mainly opt for it at home if I'm eating something like a curry and want an appropriate accompaniment, but on a night off.
And then from Bacallion at Bacallion UK, yep, it's okay and it's still beer. It's useful when driving or having dry days and want refreshment. Quality is very good now. And that seems to be a theme that came up time and time again, is that the quality of alcohol-free beers has improved massively over the last couple of years. I mean, certainly since we started doing the show, Martin, I think one of the very first episodes we did was a alcohol-free show, which you threatened to leave as co-host if I ever suggested we did such a thing again.
I know, and we've done it again.
We have done it again, and I think we'll probably do it again as
probably
well,
will,
because the beers continue to get better and better. But loads of great comments on that one this week. I know it wasn't exactly a poll, but we did still get a lot of feedback. So there will still be a link in the show note to that particular question. So if you want to have a look at all the responses, you can click through on that. If you want to carry on getting involved, you can use the hashtag Hopinions, and you may very well find yourself in this next part of the show.
Let us know, write it down. Let us know, write it down. Let us know your thoughts and bitter and lingerness. Write it down.
So first from Johnny Beer Boy at Johnny Beer Boy, another top snippet, lads, and was great to hear the wide range of comments on Hollapalooza. I did have one of those moments where you stop and everything seems insane during this discussion on a beer podcast about how far a sneeze can travel, though. It's amazing what facts can do, isn't it? From Stu Chan at Chant Stew, just listened to the new show and a great series of polls and all with interesting comments. Steve, your thoughts on the health of the nation are something that I hadn't considered, but were absolutely spot on.
From your boy, Rob Edwards, my first listen with knowledge that Mark Johnson opens every show. It's so clear to me now. How do people not know that Mark Johnson opened our show?
I don't know how people have missed that. I really don't.
Who did they think was doing it? Did they think you or I were doing it?
Yeah, that's definitely not us.
No, definitely not us.
Just to clear that one up once and for all, the let's crack open a beer and share some thoughts is Mark Johnson at the beginning of the show. It's been him since the end of 2016, I want to say.
Yeah, for quite a while now. It's at least 3 years.
Yeah.
So, and thank you very much, Mark, for doing that. So from Ronnie Bean, enjoyed listening to the show. Hearing you chatting about beer deliveries put me in mind to order another box of beer. Cheers.
From Will Watkins at Dry Your Beers. Just started this one. Disappointed it's taken Martin a whole 22 minutes to slip in the Liverpool title victory.
If I'd had my way, it would have been in there in minute 1.
And that's 2 weeks now. You've had it mentioned as well. So,
yes.
Yeah.
And for next week and the week after, no doubt.
No doubt. Yeah, he's going to ride this one for all it's worth. From Simon Clark at Simon Carbon. Great show, guys. Comprehensive coverage of the reopening situation. Totally agree with Martin's commentary. The pubs you really want to visit means using public transport. And that's not a prospect to relish right now.
So from a listener of the show called Dr. Rob, really enjoyed coming back to the show after a break. I'm an infectious disease doctor, so been a little busy and love the new format. Agree with so much what was said about reopening, and from my perspective, it's all about risk mitigation now. The one point I don't quite agree with from the last episode was the comment about once a mask is off, then there's no point in putting it back on in a pub setting. Masks are great at protecting others from you and further reduce the risk of transmission by wearing them when using the bathrooms or if you're going to the bar, even if you don't wear one while sitting and drinking.
Dr. Rob did also send us a link to some actual facts as well as on this one. And basically, there was a study done by the US National Library of Medicine, National Institutes of Health, where they looked at using face masks with a control group of multi-drug resistant TB patients. 69 of 90 control individuals became infected, compared with 36 of 90 individuals, representing a 56% decreased risk of TB transmission when patients used masks. The conclusion that was made that was surgical face masks on patients with multi-drug resistant TB significantly reduced transmission and offer an adjunct measure for reducing TB transmission from infectious patients. And then the final comment this week from Richard Taylor at Richard Taylor, and this was answering the question that we asked our listeners last week about cask beer and do we think we're going to see a reduction in it. Rich was saying, and obviously Rich is the manager of the Vic in Colchester, which won't be opening until I think the end of the month. They've got for end of July, haven't they? Yeah. On cask beer, we'll be reducing our lines from 5 to 3. This will reduce the amount of stock needed, which reduces the risk of wastage or the serving of poor quality beer. Unlike some pubcos, we'll be buying in fresh local beer, not adjusting the dates on older stock. And just keep those thoughts coming. Keep using the hashtag Hopinions. Let's get some final thoughts on these beers then, if there's any left in the glasses.
Nope, no beer left.
Okay, well then you go first with your final thoughts, mate.
I mean, for a 9.2% beer, which is very much on a malt-driven beer, sweet, it's still so drinkable. That little bit of alcohol burn, I mean, I say alcohol burn as in very slight, more of a warming feel. It's just a beer you will come back to time and again. If someone had said, I'll top you up, do you mind? I would go, no, carry on. It's just so well balanced, and that lightness of touch in the body is what does it. They know how, the Belgians know how to do that lightness of touch. So it's not thin, but it should feel thicker. If you look at that beer, you read the descriptor, it should have a much thicker mouthfeel, but it don't. So easy. I can see how liquid bread became a phrase.
Yeah, I'm gonna in terms of my beer, I'm gonna jump in with the Chimay there. I would echo everything you've said in terms of this beer as well. It does all of that as well. It belies its 9% that it's got on the bottle there. And yeah, it is just really, really drinkable. And it's got a lovely warming finish on it now as it's warmed up in the glass some more as well. So I've really enjoyed drinking both of those. A little exploration into Belgium for us tonight, mate. Jonny, what's the final verdict on the Abbaye Poundage?
Well, I think as it's got slightly warmed up, I had it chilled and then I put it aside when we started, so it warmed up a bit. But it's warmed up a bit more. I'm getting a really kind of dried sour cherry note out of it, and a hint of smoke. Its sort of complexity level has risen. It's really fabulous.
I don't know about you, Steve, but I'm really keen to try that beer now.
Me too. I've been like much like yourself when you said earlier, when is the right time to try it? Kind of feels like now is the time to try that. Not maybe this evening after the recording, but certainly now is the time to try that beer.
I would say that we need to put, Steve and I do a bit of planning. I would say we put this on the schedule in the next 3 months as one of the beers we do. Well,
we have our 4th birthday coming up in September. Why don't we maybe pencil it in for that day?
Oh, I think that would be an excellent suggestion, actually. That would be a really good suggestion. And based on what we've got, Jonny's very extensive tasting notes now, which we can just crib and take little bits out of, and hopefully no one will know that we've done that.
It's great that we've all enjoyed these beers this evening, and that's probably bringing us quite nicely towards the end of the show. Jonny, thank you for joining us as this week's guest drinker. Where can folk find you and your work?
So my podcast is just the Beer Wrangler podcast on pretty much any podcast app or anything like that. I teach courses at South London Wine School. So we do beer and wine there. So yeah, Beer Wrangler or South London Wine School. I know it doesn't say beer in the name, but there you go. That's where people can find me.
And all of that will be linked through in the show notes, so people can just click through and find you. Martin, what have we got coming up next week?
Content-wise, I have no idea. However, I do know we have some more beers from Brew York, which have landed very recently, and I'm very excited about a couple of them, I have to admit.
So am I. I'm excited about the ones that we're featuring next week. I know one of them we've already spoken about very, very highly, but I am very excited to actually try it on the podcast as well.
Oh, I'm excited to drink it anytime I can. I've got to hold one can back so Michelle can have some, which is really annoying me right now.
It's so drinkable, but let's not give too much away because we'll get onto that next week. All that's left to say is once again thank you, Jonny, for joining us this evening. We'll be back next week. Cheers
guys.
Cheers.